Holy God, we thank you. May it be the prayer that each of us pray today to recommit ourselves to this cause, to this work. There are many things that call for our attention. On the very cusp, on the very brink of eternity, it's very easy to become weary, to become tired of well-doing. May we gain warmth and strength not only from one another, but also through you, through the agencies that you send to us. And primarily through a study and an analysis of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to welcome everybody back to my second and last presentation. Yesterday's presentation began because of a discussion that I was having with the ministry leader in Canada. They had a study, and they were comparing different aspects of culture, we will call it, different worldviews, we might say. For instance, gun rights, views on gay marriage, views on abortion. Freedom of expression, discrimination, etc. And they made a little box and spoke about various groups. Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and this movement. And based upon their discussion, I was asked a question: what the movement's position is on gun rights, or we might call it gun ownership. So if I've used the phrase gun rights, gun ownership, or carrying a gun, they're all synonymous terms. So when people speak about the right to bear arms, in my experience, people have very strong views, very polarized views on the subject. So it was with that idea that both Katya and myself said that we would speak on the subject. We have not coordinated. She didn't know what I was going to say, and I didn't know what she was going to say. So the reason why the conversation came up separate to the discussion was that there are some people in the movement who possess a gun, either they carry it or they keep it in their home. And that seemed to be strange. There almost seemed to be a contradiction to our belief system. So yesterday we spoke about the Second Amendment again. And hopefully you can see on the board here, we picked up two special words, militia and people. So just to remind us why we did that. When you're going to go to the law, the testimony, inspiration, any document really, any piece of information, you will inevitably view that information from your worldview. We'll use two words to describe that. Opinion and bias. Now, they're two words that we should be familiar with in the movement now. Because we often speak about media bias. And more than half of all the articles that we share with one another they're not news articles. They're opinion pieces. So I hope you will understand the difference between an opinion piece or an opinion article and a news article. If you're not clear on the difference between the two, you will make mistakes. You will turn the truth into a lie or a lie into the truth. And I've just substituted the word opinion with lie. So that shouldn't come as a surprise to you. You should all understand that. But it's more complex than that. It's much more subtle. Because even if someone is just reporting the news, we will now use another word. Their prejudices, using prejudice as a synonym of opinion, of bias, of lie. So they will, when reporting on the facts, they will use language that is created based upon their bias or their prejudices. And that's one of the reasons why it's very difficult to have confidence in what you read. Not like people are saying there were 20 people who were hurt, and someone says, no, that's a lie, it's wrong. There were 25. It's not that. Everybody reports the correct number. 20 people were injured. But it's how you portray that event based upon your biases, your prejudices, that will catch you and warp or twist your understanding of reality. So we must always be aware of this. And too many of us are not cognizant of the fact that we need to be really careful. Cognizant means aware. So it's one thing to read an article and it affect you personally, but when you share it, you're now affecting others. And sometimes we're not careful enough about the articles that we read ourselves, and in particular, the ones we share with one another. So that's what I've just mentioned there is not something new. So we could go to a website called Media Bias, and we could trust those people who collate that information. But that cannot be the definitive standard to know if something is, if a source is safe or not. So we're all required to analyze and judge what we read, what we hear. It's a reality, a fact that we can never escape, that some are better and some are worse at doing this. So when I use the word analyze and I say this, do this analysis, we need to use some rules that we all agree on so that they can be checked against a reference point. And we all understand that our reference point or our rule-based analysis is Miller's 14 rules. I haven't, and maybe it's because I don't know everything that's being taught in the movement, but I haven't heard for a long time people analyzing or presenting Miller's rules. There are plenty of older studies that take an esoteric view of those rules and try to break them down. But I haven't seen much work done to look at those rules in a contemporary setting. Simply put, too many of us are not good at analyzing information using methodology or Miller's rules. Because we don't have the experience and we don't come together regularly enough in groups to discuss those things. So coming back to our study, one of the analysis tools that we use is looking for keywords or important words. And in the subject we're addressing, the Second Amendment, it was militia and people. Now, when I asked the question yesterday, many people got the wrong answers. And I want to suggest it's not because we had, say, 30 words to choose from and everybody's got their own ideas about what is important and what is not important. Now, to do that work effectively, you have to bring many threads of information together. Let's say it this way, you have to be widely read. You have to read a lot. One of the problems that I have privately and publicly voiced my concern about is that not enough of us read. What I mean by that is we read too many articles and not enough books. And if a person isn't widely read, reading good quality material, books, I think they are unqualified to even approach applying and using methodology and expect to get good results. So if you don't know the arguments that the left and the right are using with respect to the Second Amendment, you won't know how to pick the key words as we did yesterday. Off subject, we all claim to be radical feminists. Depending on when you want to put a start date on that, we'll say it's at least 5 years. Hello? Is my audio and visual video good? Yes?
All good.
Okay, great. So unless you're widely read, you're not going to be able to pick up what the key words are. It becomes guesswork. And when I asked that question yesterday, it was an exercise to expose your biases, not your ignorance. Because what the question was really asking is, not what your bias was, but what is the bias of the left and the right? And each of us needs to remember, as we juggle, juggle is handling two concepts at the same time. You have to be, what are the two concepts? What is the juggling that we're required to do? Let me ask that as a question. Hopefully the chat's working. I think it is. Not progression and repeating. Let me try and remember my question. Yes, I remember now. I was trying to remember what the answer was. I'll give it. No one's giving me, there aren't enough people giving an answer. So it's about being observers and participants. And the reason we got all of those multitude of different answers when I said, give me the key words, is because people have become stuck in this participant world or this participant viewpoint. And it's articles that do that if you're not careful. Maybe we should call it stories. When you read a sad story, you begin to have empathy for that perspective. And it's easy to lose objectivity. When we talk about observers, this is the true work of a journalist. And we're not sticking to these rules properly. This is one of the reasons why we make mistakes in our methodology. I'll put it that way. It's because we have begun to lose a grip or control to be able to distinguish between observing and participating. And when it comes to a study that you're doing, this is why there's too many bad studies in our movement. Because we become participants of the study instead of observers. Back to our subject. Oh, before I got cut off, I wanted to say something off topic. We've been radical feminists for 5 years. Just picked a random date. How many books on radical feminism have you read in the past 5 years? If it's less than 10, you're a fake radical feminist. When I use the word fake, I mean you're not serious about this. We have become blinded. We have become obsessed with news articles. "200 news articles that you may have read in the past 5 years will not substitute for 10 good books on a subject." I'm not saying this to tell people off, but I am saying the number 10 is conservative because it's only 2 books a year. And just as a general reader, you should be on around 6 books a year. If you don't have time to read, you have time to die or fail, depending how you want to look at it. Okay. Our question yesterday is, what do those people, those on the left and those on the right, say? And the reason why we tripped up on that, many of us, is because you didn't say left and right in your thinking. So I'm going to say, what did you say in your mind? That's a question, but it's rhetorical because I'm going to answer it. Too many of us, because we're stuck in this mindset of being participants, we identify ourselves as what? What do you identify yourself as? On the board. It's on the board. Good. On the left, because you're going to say, this is us. Me. And then this group is what? Them. If you get into the mindset of a them and us worldview when you're studying, you will always come to a dangerous place, is putting it politely. I would suggest, not so humbly, that if you approach study and you're entering into that study as one of the combatants, so you're one of these groups, you will almost inevitably make mistakes. There might be big ones, there may be small ones. If you don't get this concept straight in your mind, you will continue to harm yourself. And this is not to scare you. And every time you stand up to teach, you're going to harm someone else. And if you think that's a call to stop you teaching, if you don't teach, you're in bigger trouble. What changed this movement's thinking? It was, I want to suggest it was the events of prophecy themselves that did that. Once 2014 came, it changed us. 2001 didn't. 2001, we were observing a war between two combatants. Which is all fine and well. But we knew enough that when you come to the Sunday law, you end up having to, you're affected by what's happening around you. You're no longer an observer, you're a participant. So it's not just some theoretical study on Matthew 13 that turned us from observers to participants. It was prophecy itself. And you may not make the connection, or you may not have made the connection, past, present. If I were to say the 4 and the 6, or the person is political, whatever catchphrase you want to use, those concepts all stem from one issue, one concept. That the experience and the message changed in 2014. We then began to experience prophecy, not observe it only. We began to experience it personally. Because that's what prophecy teaches about the end of the world. It's something that you experience. And that's why the whole tone of our message has changed. It's not the skill of the Midnight Cry messenger that did that, not some special insight that they had. Without that skill, we would never have moved along. So that was required. But if that work was done in the prior dispensation, it would never have had any effect. So I want us to understand that we're victims of prophecy. And you are required to fight that experience, resist it. And the only tool you have is the same word over and over again, methodology, how you approach things. Okay, so we've read several books on the Second Amendment, both views. At least some news articles. And what we realized was the following. The people on the left, they're non-violent people, but they recognized the necessity, if you want to say that, at least the importance of maintaining a government, making sure society continues. People on the left don't have a problem with, we'll just call them weapons. You can see that very clearly in US foreign policy. But what they say is that work of protectionism has to happen in a certain way in a particular context. And in this context, it's militia. It's an army, we will call it, a military force that is raised up by whom? So answer this one in the chat. Who raises up that militia? Don't say themselves. Good. We'll just call it the government, the rulers, the leaders. So the government raises up the militia, and the left say that's legitimate. The right say, sure, we agree with that. But we also believe that individuals have a right to protect themselves. Each of the two groups develop their worldviews, their models from their biases. And our job is just to observe that fact. So we did all of that work. We got our two key words. Now we know the arguments that each side uses. So some of the questions that I got after the presentation, comments, questions. They were all clustered around the same problem. Which was what? What was the problem that people were having? Not personal bias, not self-defense. It's on the board. They said in their thing that the left don't like gun ownership. Put simplistically, that's a fact. And then they made the critical mistake. Who is the left? Us. That's the mistake that people make. I don't like guns. They're dangerous. They're harmful. We have all the statistics. We have all the facts. And you've got all the facts, all the statistics of how corrupt every government is. That doesn't stop you from having either compliance or confidence in the government. Once we take ourselves out of this, then we have to view this statement, this document, using different tools. So we're all experts on this issue because we're not originalists, are we? We don't believe in originalism. What what are you if you're not an originalist? They're the originalist. What are you? We'll just call it um, a living document. Someone put it well. They said we're living constitutionalists. I like that. Yeah, someone gave a good answer. Someone called it contextualism. So I agree with that. What we do is we look at the context. And that's what the term living means. It changes as time goes on. So all of that is good. It's correct. But if you follow that path, what you end up doing or coming to the conclusion is the following. That these are two completely different models, two different ideologies. They're diametrically opposed. So you've got your choice. We all agree that we can have a military. We call it a militia. So we'll put that away. The argument isn't that. The argument is, are you allowed to carry a firearm for personal, we'll call it personal protection. That's your personal property. The right say yes, and the left say no. The right say that's what they used to do back in the day, originally. And the left say, sure, but it's not fit for purpose anymore. Why isn't it fit for purpose anymore? Because we have people shooting innocent people in the at schools or at the shopping centres, at malls. The reason why that can't be an argument is because what did you have in the past? Didn't you have the same problem? Have people become more evil in the last 200 years? Many of us are going to say yes, but the obvious answer is no. We live in a safer, better world today than we did 200 years ago. So we have to be careful about the arguments that we're using. Because what ends up happening is you end up coming to conclusions that are inconsistent. So hopefully we all remember what we did yesterday. We said the way we're going to approach it is juxtapositioning. When you do that, what do you have to do first if you're going to juxtapose things? What do you have to do or know first? You're going to juxtapose so you have good. You have two models, and you have to know that one of them is correct or the truth. Now, we jumped through many steps. We didn't do a rigorous study yesterday, but the conclusion was that it's correct, it's okay, it's legitimate to have a military, a militia to protect the government. So once you know that, and and then you cross-reference that to what you're going to juxtapose it with. You have to ensure that the pattern is the same. And who helped us to do that? Person's name. So they've told me here it's John Locke. Because when you go to the militia, the militia are protecting what? They're not protecting happiness. They're protecting property. We could argue that they are protecting a way of life, a concept. But in its broadest aspect, we're talking about property. So now we know the model for the militia, then we just have to see, do we have the same characteristics for the individual? And we do. The militia want to preserve a way of life. The individual wants to preserve a way of life. So once you have done that, you have established the parallelism between them. The answer just falls straight out. All the hard work is done before. Sometimes in English, we might call it all the heavy lifting. If you get that correct, the final steps will be rapid ones. Because some comments said, where did you get that from? Because it seems so simplistic. That's why I want people to really think about the veracity, the truthfulness of what I am suggesting. It's not in what was taught yesterday. That's just the tip of the iceberg. It's everything that's hidden. That's where you know, and if you have that correct, you know what the foundation is. Then the last bit is just a procedural issue. But as I said, in lots of the answers that I got after the meeting, people turn this into a moral issue. Like they do a face palm and say, where is the movement headed now? Oh, we're all going to carry guns now. Am I advocating gun ownership? Well, of course I'm not. But one thing, it only affects about 50 members in a whole movement because no one else is allowed to have a gun. We miss the point. It's very easy to miss the point when you bring yourself and your biases into your studies. So what I wanted to show us in this question or this study was not some novelty. It was an exercise in methodology. I tried studiously to avoid any moral statement, any moral perspective. You can't say, well, this is going to give license to more violence. Because it's not a statement or a position based upon methodology. What you have to ask yourself is, I'll just say it's not only one, but you have to ask yourself a foundational question. What is the foundational question that we need to address in this subject? See what you think. We'll begin with is. I will, you don't have to. And we're going to close on this point. We had so many people yesterday throw their answers in. So the first answer, I don't think so. Second answer, get in there. Cold, warmer. It's foundational, so you've got to take guns out. Okay, I'll give you my thoughts, and then you can comment. And I'll just give a simple answer at the end, a simple word. We could express it much better. Is it okay to protect yourself, to defend yourself? That's the question that you have to ask. Not, it's got nothing to do with guns. Because I don't need a gun. I'll just use chi to harm you. I don't need bullets or anything. I can destroy all my enemies with my chi. So what we need to understand is not the degree of harm something can do. A slap, a punch, a kick, chi, knife, gun. It's irrelevant. Why is it irrelevant? Because they are all the same things. They're instruments of pain. I suggest, in my opinion, the degree of pain is not the issue. If you have a gun, kneecap the person, don't shoot their heart. Kneecapping is when you shoot someone in the knee. I guess hopefully we'll know that. We're not going to translate that. Or if I cut off there, you shoot the person in the knee. So even a gun can be used in subtle ways. What you need to ask yourself is, are you allowed to defend yourself, your property? Is that allowed? And the problem is, too many of us give the answer no. I say that because it's obviously the wrong answer. And so the question you need to ask yourself or ask one another is, why do so many of us think you're not allowed to defend yourself? Where did you get that idea from? So someone says, Christian said, because Jesus didn't. And after our study yesterday, that I like that one, turn the other cheek, that's always going to come up. So we had a discussion, those who the members that were here in person after the meeting yesterday, and we discussed this very point. So I won't give you my perspective of that, how I would answer that issue. Maybe next week. But in the meantime, ask yourselves where you get this idea from. Is it your understanding of the New Testament? Or is it because of the way you've been brought up, your cultural beliefs? Wherever you get these ideas from, you need to analyze them critically. Which means to read widely first before you come to conclusions. And then you'll be able to answer this question. So one of our members has had to defend themselves 14 times, one for each of Miller's rules. So someone says Peter was carried a concealed sword, but he got his knuckles wrapped. He got told off for doing that. So it was wrong for him to have a weapon. And that's one of the arguments that people use to say no self-defense. Okay, so in summary, I've tried to go over the steps that we went through yesterday. I've tried to discuss why mistakes were made yesterday. I'm suggesting it's because we live in a time, a dispensation, where we're forced to become participants, not just observers. And we're falling into the trap of this them and us dynamic. Because we are not on the left. And we're not on the right. We're supposed to be, according to inspiration, ambassadors. We use the word observers. And we have to know when to apply that ideology and when not to. So I want to close on this last point. Final comment said, women have to defend themselves. And remember, I said, this is not about guns or knives or hands or feet. It's about the principle of whether you are allowed to defend your property. And if you are, if it's okay to defend your property, in one example, you only need one example, then you know you're allowed to do it, period. Because where do examples come from? The basis or the rules of examples comes from precepts. And precepts are unvarying rules that don't change. Someone has said principle and precept, they're the same. If you got one example that works and it works properly, it came from a principle. And all your work is done for you. Let's close with prayer. Holy God, we thank you for your continued watch care over your people. Our only safety is knowing information and applying the information correctly. In your word, you call that understanding and wisdom. I can't ask you to give that to us. Because you didn't create us that way. For myself, I ask that you would allow me time, opportunity, and a determined spirit to understand the truth and to apply it correctly. I thank you that you've let me be in this place in this movement that is the only place to secure this wealth. I thank you that you hold my hand through this process. And I speak for myself and for all those who are bowed before you now. That we might continue to grow in grace and to understand what can bring us together. Perfect love casts out fear. And the truth sets us free. May we hold on to these promises in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to thank everybody for their time and their participation. I hope you've enjoyed the studies that I've done. As much as I've enjoyed them. Thank you. Bye-bye.